I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
Calling all wise guys, made men, and mobsters alike. We'll unravel a dark, hidden underworld where murder, mayhem, and money laundering are commonplace and par for the course. These goombahs and their goons glorify violence and live by a code of silence. Snitches and rats beware. Forget about it. We'll demystify the Mafia on this week's episode of FYI. Welcome to For Your Info.
En inglés.
You got it. Hello, and welcome to another exciting edition of FYI, the topic-based show where we learn about everything and anything. And if you haven't found a topic you'd like to hear about in the over 200 episodes available, please let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Today we're going to take a look at a topic that I'm familiar with. Unfortunately, I'm not a big fan of organized crime, but I do believe that the stories are fascinating. And now that I think about it, I'm not a fan of any kind of crime. But coming from a Sicilian-American family that immigrated to the United States around the same time as these mob guys, and as we're going to see, there are many different ways to call a mafia guy, a mafioso, a made man, a wise guy. Hey, wait, those are all in our intro. So let's take a look at our intro. But before we do that, I just want a little disclaimer here. I think I've made it clear, but in no moment do I want to glorify violence. Of course, we're going to laugh, we're going to have some fun, we're going to learn, but violence is just that, violence, and it's unnecessary. Oh, and we're also going to highlight the Italian-American mafia in the United States. Although there are mafias all over the world. You've got the Yakuza, the Russian mafia, the Chinese mafia. But in the end, our idea is to tell these fascinating stories of business, murder, mayhem. We started out hearing Vito Corleone, played by the one and only Marlon Brando. And that famous line, "I'm gonna make you an offer you can't refuse." And as you know, that's used even in pop culture these days when you're saying that you're gonna threaten someone. And to threaten is amenazar. Then I said, calling all wise guys. Now, wise is sabio. Somebody who's wise knows a lot of things. When we talk about wise, we talk about owls. But wise guys is another way to say a mafioso, a made man, a wise guy, or a mobster. And as I said before, the mob is another way to say the mafia. Then I said, we'll unravel. And to unravel means to explain, to solve. In Spanish, resolver, descifrar, aclarar. We'll unravel a dark, hidden underworld. And hidden, just be careful with that word. It's hide, hid, hidden. I've heard a lot of students say hidden, but the participle is hidden. We'll unravel a dark, hidden underworld where murder, no murder, murder, mayhem is another way of saying chaos, and money laundering. Money laundering is blanqueamiento de capitales. So where money laundering are commonplace, común, corriente, and par for the course, viene con el territorio. This is an expression that comes from golf. And then I wrapped up saying these goombahs, and do you remember that word from our Sopranos episode? A goombah is a guy. It comes from the word compadre, compadre in Spanish, but when they say it quickly in Italian, it sounds like goombah. So goombah. And don't mix up goombahs with goombahs. Goombahs are Italian guys, and goombahs are their affairs. The woman, their lovers is the word I'm looking for. It's very well known that mafiosi are not really faithful to their wives. So the goombahs have a goomah. What language are we speaking? And then I said they're goons, and goons are like matones, these big gorillas. The goombahs and their goons glorify violence and live by a code of silence. Did you catch that rhyme in there? And then I said snitches and rats beware. Those are two ways to say somebody who tells on somebody or rats somebody out. Chivarse. And then I said, forget about it, which, as we said in the Sopranos episode, has a lot of different meanings. If you recall, I said there's a scene in the famous movie Donnie Brasco with Johnny Depp where he explains it. But we're not going to talk about movies right now. We're going to take a look at movies in the bonus episode. And just a quick reminder, guys, we have a bonus episode every week where you can learn so many expressions, vocabulary, structures, common mistakes, and tons of fun facts. And if you want access to that bonus episode, as well as PDFs with all the vocabulary, well, then you should consider joining our curious community on Patreon. It's patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. And you can get classes with me, weekly group classes where we review each episode. If you're in our highest level, our interstellar level, well, you can even get a monthly private class with me. All the information's over on patreon.com/Alberto Alonso. And in the bonus part today, we're going to take a look at this crazy cast of characters, some of the most ruthless gangsters ever. Oh, and funniest too. We'll also take a look at an old law that finally put so many bosses behind bars. We'll learn some Mafia vocab and tons of fun facts. If you'd like to join us in the bonus part, consider joining us on Patreon, patreon.com/Alberto Alonso for more information. And I'd like to send a shout out to all my patrons, especially my super duper students, Javier, Paco, Roberto, Jose Maria, Mila, and Alex. And don't forget about my interstellar students, the ones who get a private class with me every month, Carmen, Lina, Isa, Paco, David, and Edgar. Keep up the great work, guys. I've got to say, we are like a family. Oh, and speaking of families, let's get back to the family. The Cosa Nostra. Let's start with a little etymology. The word mafia derives from the Sicilian adjective mafioso with a U. And I'm going to stop doing that voice before I destroy my vocal cords. But the word mafioso is roughly translated as bravado, boldness, swagger. Hey, it makes sense. And if they use it in reference to a woman, which would be mafiosa instead of mafioso, it means beautiful or attractive. See, did you know you were going to be learning some Sicilian here today? Well, in order to trace the roots of the Italian mafia in New York, in the United States, we have to go to Sicily. And there were several criminal organizations in Italy. You had the Camorra in Naples, but the mafia down in the south, in Sicily, they were perhaps the strongest. And they were the ones who decided that it was time to go to the New World. And as many of you know, there was a lot of immigration to the United States at that time, not just Sicilians. But a lot of these people who were coming over, they were promised that they would have a job, that the streets were paved with gold. And then they got there and they realized, wait, I barely speak the language. I don't have any skills. I can't get a job. What am I going to do? And of course, as nationalities and cultures do, they stick together and they help each other out. So at first, the mafia came as a sense of necessity, not to the clients, but to the actual mafiosi. Their excuse is that they couldn't find real jobs, so they had to come up with their own organization. But this organization didn't follow many rules, although they do have some strict rules that all the mafiosi have to follow. And we'll take a look at those 10 commandments a little bit later. And so the mafia in the United States emerged in the area of 5 points. I'm sure you guys have seen it in Scorsese movies and many movies. And Capone was a person who frequented that area, 5 points. But these gangs were starting to show up in these immigrant neighborhoods in New York's East Harlem, or as it was called then, Italian Harlem, the Lower East Side, and Brooklyn. And they were even seeing some activity in New Orleans and Chicago during the late 19th century and early 20th century. Again, it was all linked with waves of Italian immigration from Sicily and other regions of southern Italy. So sure, when the United States opened its doors with Ellis Island in 1892, they came here looking for opportunities. They didn't find them, so they made their own opportunities. And still to this day, the mafia is most active in the northeastern United States. The heaviest mob activity is in New York, Philly, Baltimore, New Jersey, Pittsburgh, Buffalo, Boston. I mean, these are major cities where you'll see the mafia. But the mafia has even extended their tentacles to small-town America. Hey, wherever there's a buck to be made, there's a racket. What? A racket? No, not a tennis racket. A racket in this case is an illegal business, and the charge is called racketeering. But if you noticed, I didn't even mention Florida, Las Vegas. I mean, there are movies and books written about the mafia in Las Vegas. The mafia built Las Vegas. That's a true statement. And let's not even mention Los Angeles and their influence in show business. Some people say that Frank Sinatra wouldn't do anything without the mafia's permission. And as a punishment once, he had to play a certain gangster's club for 3 or 4 nights in a row. So they had their claws in everything. So to answer the question I said at the beginning, where is the mafia? Everywhere. Everywhere there's money to be made. At the mafia's peak, there were at least 26 cities around the U.S. with Cosa Nostra families. In New York, you've got the 5 families, as they're known. The Gambino family, the Lucchese family, the Genovese family, the Bonanno family, and the Colombo family. And up until that time, these families were in competition. And when you're in competition with each other in the mafia, you don't settle your disputes with a handshake or a signature. You settle them with lead. Plomo, as you say in Spanish. And lots of it. And there were many mafiosos who believed that they were doing things the wrong way. Because one thing is to make money, and one thing is to gain a really bad reputation for being cold-blooded killers. So there was a certain faction in the mafia that said, hey, come on, guys, we've got to run this like a legitimate business. No more killing each other in the streets like those old gangster movies when you pull out machine guns and fill everybody full of lead. We've got to sit down, we've got to dialogue, we've got to come up with answers so that we can share, and we all get our piece of the pie. And they created something called the commission. And this commission was like the board of directors, the executive committee, where the bosses of all the families would sit down and divvy up all their territories, all their businesses, so they wouldn't have to be killing each other in the streets anymore. The person who created the commission was a guy named Massaria, the boss. He was the boss at the time, but his underling, Lucky Luciano, and we're going to look at all the different positions a little bit later. His underling, Lucky Luciano, killed him. And even though the commission didn't have an official boss because it was a way to share the power, everybody knew that Lucky Luciano was responsible for bringing everybody together in an orderly fashion. He believed that there needed to be a changing of the guard. They needed to clean up their reputation, and they needed to think about business and money instead of blood and guns. Now, he said that as he killed his boss. And the way Masseria was killed is Lucky Luciano took him to lunch. He went up to go to the bathroom, and a few guys came in, and that was the end of that. And Lucky Luciano was unstoppable. After that, he removed Sal Maranzano. Well, not him personally. He ordered the hit, and to order es pedir que lo hagan, and a hit es un asesinato. In fact, a hitman es un sicario. And as I said, Lucky did this. He got rid of these old bosses because he felt like they were stopping. They were somehow preventing the mafia from growing. And we're going to talk more about Lucky Luciano because they call him the father of the modern mafia. He modernized it, and of course, he had a few friends helping him out. But we'll take a look at some of the most famous mob bosses in the bonus part. Let's take a look at the hierarchy, as I said before. You've got the boss, which is obviously the boss. That person calls the shots. The undisputed leader of the family. This person gets a share of all the profits and makes all the final decisions, or as we say, has the final say. And right under the boss, you have an underboss, who is the second in command and, for all intents and purposes, the heir to the throne if something were to happen to the boss. Oh, and spoiler alert, usually bosses don't live to be very old, unless you're Lucky Luciano, earning his nickname, but more about him in the bonus part. Next, you've got your consigliere, and that's like your lawyer, your closest advisor, your business advisor. Then you've got capos, then you've got soldiers, and the soldiers are the ones that do the dirty work, like the hitmen. Those are the guys who are getting their hands dirty. And then you've got your associates. And your associates are connected without being a part of it. So if you're in a company, it's like un proveedor, un externo. And in order to be an associate, you don't have to be Italian or Sicilian, which those were the original rules to be in the mafia. And that was another thing that Lucky Luciano changed. He said, wait, why can't we work with other nationalities? This guy's a great businessman. Even though he's in the Jewish gang, I think we could make a lot of money together. So instead of focusing on personal vendettas from Sicily, he was thinking, how can we all make more money? But the older guys, well, as you can imagine, they were more traditional. The best thing that ever happened to the American mafia, and I imagine the mafia anywhere near the Americas, prohibition. The 18th Amendment. Mafia members saw their profits boom because of the bootlegging. And that's a good word. Illegal alcohol, we called it bootleg because they used to hide it in the leg of their boot. But now, to this day, you can say, oh, that's a bootleg copy. So it's used for copias en general, no solo alcohol. And they realized bootlegging was big money. They made a lot more money than they did off their traditional businesses, such as protection rackets, extortion, gambling, prostitution. And this got so many people involved with the mafia. Because if you think about this new industry that they went into, illegal alcohol, bootlegging, required members of all different employment levels. You needed bosses, lawyers, truckers, warehouse workers, distillers, and it seemed like the party would never end, especially for Al Capone, who made a lot of his money during Prohibition. And we're going to talk more about Al Capone when we take a look at our cast of characters later on. But like every party, the music ended and the lights came on, and Prohibition was over. Most Americans were celebrating, not the mafia. But they knew that if they wanted to stay relevant and continue to make money, that after 1933, when Prohibition was repealed, they diversified, as we say, and they went into other businesses such as illegal gambling operations, and we're going to talk about Las Vegas in a little bit, loan sharking, and a loan shark is prestamista ilegal. It's somebody who gives you money when you need it. They loan you money when you need it, but then they charge you so much for the interest. Oh, and if you don't pay them back, you don't want to know what's going to happen. And then you've got extortion, protection. As I said before, my family has a link to it. Now, we were never involved in the mafia. We never killed people. But again, if you remember my family, they were Sicilians who came over on the same boats as these people, some of them. And they had businesses, and they wanted to make sure those businesses were protected. So has my family donated money to the cause? I can imagine they have. Well, what was the other option? And when the mafia really found their cash cow is when they were able to infiltrate unions. In the mid-20th century, they infiltrated the Teamsters Union. The Teamsters Union is all the shipping and trucking. You probably recognize the president of that union, Jimmy Hoffa, a gangster whose body has never been found. And you can hear the story of his life, or I should say you can see the story of his life in Martin Scorsese's The Irishman. And my dad is a member of the Teamsters Union because he was a truck driver. They also infiltrated the International Longshoremen's Association. So that's the docks, los muelles, everything that came in and out of the United States. And many people say that New York City, as we know it today, would never have been built without the mafia. Well, as we know it today, I'm sure it would have been built anyway. But most of the iconic buildings and the buildings that were built during the 80s were built by the mafia. Everybody who lives in New York knows that if you've got a construction project, or at least back then, you had to be connected. Again, they had the unions, they had the cement companies, and you could not move one brick in New York City in the 80s without the mafia's permission. And you can imagine they were marking it up, and tremendously, not just 1%. And if these construction companies didn't play ball, okay, no problem. Stop all the workers. And we all know what happens when there's no work done on a construction site. Every minute, you're just burning money. So they had no choice. The mafia found their way into that industry. Another industry in the United States that they're very famous for being involved in is sanitation, waste removal. If you remember in The Sopranos, that was one of Tony Soprano's businesses. And The Sopranos, just like The Irishman and many of the movies we're going to see later on, are all based on true stories. Even if they're just loosely based, they really happened, many of the stories, from Goodfellas, from The Godfather. They just changed the names and the situation a little bit. So they basically bribed their way into every industry. And to bribe is sobornar. And they were able to do that, too, because of their code of silence. They didn't have many rules when it came to killing people, but if you opened your mouth, that was the end of it for you. I think many of you have heard of this code of silence, omerta or omerta. I've heard it pronounced both ways. And if you failed to follow along with this code of silence, I think you know what would happen to you. Right now, we're going to hear an audio clip of Joseph Michael Valachi, and he was an American mobster in the Genovese crime family. He was the first member of the Italian-American mafia to acknowledge that it existed publicly. And this is an audio, a very famous audio of him testifying in 1963. And he talks about omerta, the code of silence, and also about the initiation ceremony. Let's hear Valachi and see if you can keep up with him.
He's got a really raspy voice, and he's got a very Italian-American accent.
If you guys are patrons, don't worry. You'll have the vocabulary in the PDFs.
And there was a gun and a knife on the table. And
How many were at the table?
about 35 to 40. And sat me down and made me repeat in Italian.
Did they set you down at the table or in a chair out front?
Sat me down on the end of the table with Maranzana doing the talking, next to Maranzana.
All right. Now, you sat next to him. Then what happened?
Well, he had the knife and the gun on the table. I repeated some words he told me, but I only could explain what he meant. I could repeat the words, but they were in Sicilian.
They were what?
In Sicilian.
In Sicilian.
Sicilians.
You repeated, but you didn't understand what they meant.
Right. Then they explained.
They explained what they meant. Who explained? Maranzana?
Well, he could talk pretty good English, Maranzana. He talked 12 languages. He went on to explain that you live by the gun and by the knife, and you die by the gun and by the knife.
What kind of a ceremony did you go through?
Well, then...
And taking that oath?
Well, then he gave me a piece of paper. I was supposed to, and burn it. And
well, now, without burning the paper, just take a piece of paper there and show us how you did it. You don't even set the paper afire, but take a piece of, give him a piece of paper. Let's demonstrate just what you did.
In other words, now this piece of paper, piece of paper is burned.
Paper's burning.
You light it.
Yeah.
And then in your hand you say, well, again they give you words in Italian, but I know what it meant.
In other words, while you were repeating the words, you were burning the paper.
Right. This is the way I burn if I expose this organization.
And that was symbolic of the fate that was to befall you if you betrayed the organization.
Right. Until the piece of paper burned.
You'd be burned to ashes.
Right.
Now, what else did you do in that ceremony?
Then after that, they got around the table and they threw numbers.
They drew what?
Numbers. Between 1 to 5, for instance.
How you mean?
Well, here, like this, throw 3 or 1 or 5. Let's say the way you got a table there right now, everybody throws a number.
In other words, we'd start down there at the table, and somebody would hold up a number, each one would hold up some fingers.
Yeah, we count
They could hold up as many as they wanted to.
Up to 5.
Up to 5. Well,
right.
That's about all they hold on.
Well, let's say we start from you, Senator.
Yeah, we start with me.
And let's say it's 35, 40.
I put up 2.
Right.
And he put up some.
Yeah, you add it all up. Let's say
you add it all up.
Let's say we get a figure about 38.
About 38, all right.
We start from you. And let's say you go all around and it comes to the senator next to you.
Yeah, he's next to me.
He is my, what you call, godfather. Then he picks your finger.
Who?
The godfather.
He picks your finger?
He picks your finger with a needle. Makes a little blood come out. In other words, that's to express the blood relation. Supposed to be like brothers.
That's the letting of blood.
That's right.
In other words, symbolic of the fact you're willing to spill your blood.
Right.
To give your blood, to give your life.
Yeah. As to what I'm telling you now, I need to go no further to say nothing else. This is what I'm telling you, what I'm exposing to you and the press and everybody. This is my doom. This is the promise I'm breaking that even if I talk, I should never talk about this, and I'm doing so. That's my best way to explain.
That is the highest oath you took.
Right.
In other words, that was the most sacred in this organization.
Right. I want
that you would never tell this.
Right. Right.
There you go, folks. Pretty interesting stuff there. A piece of history. I hope you guys have enjoyed the first part of today's show and that you'll join us in the bonus episode of today's FYI.